Eleanor Finch traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, a man whose letters painted dreams of partnership and respect. But when she stepped off that train into the dust of Hammond's Bend, he never came. No explanation, no apology, just silence. With her last dollar spent and nowhere to turn, Eleanor made a choice that would change everything. She walked into the wilderness alone. What she found bleeding beneath those rocks wasn't the man she expected. It was someone far more dangerous, because he knew exactly who she was, and he'd been waiting. Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale travels. The train's whistle cut through the afternoon heat like a knife through butter, sharp and final. Eleanor Finch pressed her gloved hand against the soot-stained window, watching the landscape shift from rolling green to endless brown. The further west they traveled, the more the world seemed to strip itself bare. First the trees thinned, then the grass yellowed, until finally there was nothing but dust and stone and a sky so wide it made her chest ache. She'd been traveling for 6 days. 6 days of hard seats and stale bread, of sleeping upright with her carpetbag clutched to her chest like a shield. 6 days of watching the other passengers, families heading toward new starts, businessmen with leather cases and confident eyes, women who whispered behind their fans about the foolishness of mail-order brides. Eleanor heard every word. She pretended not to. The conductor's voice boomed through the car. "Hammond's Bend! Final stop! Hammond's Bend!" Her heart stuttered. Final stop. Final chance. Final gamble on a life she'd constructed from nothing but ink and paper and desperate hope. The train lurched, metal screaming against metal as it slowed. Through the window, Eleanor caught her first glimpse of the town that was supposed to become her home. It wasn't much. A single dirt road lined with wooden buildings that leaned slightly, as if exhausted by the wind. A general store. A saloon with peeling paint. A church steeple that pointed toward heaven like an accusatory finger. This is it, she thought. This is where I start over. Or where she failed completely. The possibility sat in her stomach like a stone. Eleanor stood, smoothing her traveling dress with trembling fingers. The fabric was gray, practical, modest, already showing dust from the journey. She'd sold her mother's cameo to buy it, wanting to arrive looking respectable, worthy, like the kind of woman a successful rancher might actually want as a wife. The woman a man named Daniel Rowan had described in his letters. She could recite those letters from memory. She'd read them so many times the paper had gone soft at the creases, the ink slightly smudged from her fingers. He wrote about his ranch, about the work that needed doing, about long days and honest labor. He wrote about wanting a partner, not a decoration. Someone who understood that out here, survival mattered more than social graces. "I won't lie to you," he'd written in his third letter. "Life here is hard. The land doesn't forgive mistakes. But it's honest work, and there's a kind of freedom in it. If you're willing to build something real, something that matters, then I believe we could make a good life together." Those words had struck something deep in Eleanor's chest, something that had been buried since her mother died, since the debts came due, since her uncle made it clear she was a burden he wouldn't carry much longer. Something real. That's what she wanted, what she'd always wanted. The train shuddered to a complete stop. Eleanor grabbed her carpetbag. Everything she owned fit inside it now, and joined the line of passengers shuffling toward the exit. The woman ahead of her, Mrs. Carmichael, glanced back with poorly disguised pity. "You're sure about this, dear? It's not too late to buy a ticket east." Eleanor forced a smile. "I'm sure." She wasn't sure of anything. The platform was weathered wood that groaned under her boots. The heat hit her immediately, dry and relentless, so different from the humid summers back in Pennsylvania. Eleanor set down her bag and scanned the small crowd waiting by the station. A farmer in overalls helping his wife down from the train. 2 children chasing each other around the platform supports. A man in a dusty suit consulting a pocket watch. No one looking for her. No one holding a sign or searching faces with recognition. Eleanor's chest tightened. "He'll be here," she told herself. "He's just late. Perhaps there was trouble at the ranch, or, 'Miss, you need to clear the platform.'" The conductor was already back on the train, leaning out to address her. His expression was polite but firm. "I'm waiting for someone," Eleanor said, hating how small her voice sounded. "Well, you can wait over there." He gestured toward the station building. "Train's heading back east in 20 minutes. If you're going, Better decide now. The implication was clear. Last chance to run. Eleanor picked up her bag and moved toward the station house. It was barely more than a shack, 4 walls and a roof, a bench outside, a ticket window currently shuttered. She sat on the bench, back straight, hands folded over her bag like a lady. Minutes crawled past. The train pulled away in a cloud of black smoke and grinding metal. The platform emptied. The man in the dusty suit climbed into a waiting wagon and disappeared down the main road. Eleanor sat. The sun moved across the sky, turning the shadows long and sharp. Her throat grew dry. Her back ached from holding herself so carefully upright. Still, she sat. By the time the shadows reached the far side of the street, Eleanor had to face the truth. Daniel Rowan wasn't coming. The realization didn't crash over her. It seeped in slowly, cold and certain. He'd changed his mind. Or perhaps he'd never intended to go through with it at all. Perhaps she'd been nothing but a game to him, a bit of amusement during lonely evenings. Perhaps he'd shared her letters with his ranch hands, all of them laughing at the desperate Eastern woman willing to travel so far for a man she'd never met. The thought made her stomach turn. Eleanor stood, legs stiff from sitting. The station master, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, poked his head out from the ticket window. "You still here?" "I'm waiting for Mr. Rowan, Daniel Rowan. Do you know him?" Something flickered across the man's face. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. "Rowan? Sure, I know him. Biggest ranch in the territory." He squinted at her. "What business you got with him?" Eleanor's cheeks burned. He's expecting me." The station master's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "That's so? Well, I ain't seen him, but his foreman was through here a couple days back picking up supplies. Said the boss was out checking fence lines on the North Range." "How far is his ranch?" 10 miles, give or take, due west past the canyon." He spat tobacco juice into a dented can. "You got a horse?" "No." "Money for the livery?" Eleanor opened her reticule. Inside were $3.27, every penny she had left in the world. "The hotel?" $4 a night, the station master said, not unkindly. "Boarding houses too, but old Mrs. Chen don't take women traveling alone. Says it ain't proper." "Of course not." Eleanor closed the reticule with numb fingers. $4 a night meant 1 night, with not enough left for food. 2 nights if she didn't eat at all. And then what? Throw herself on the mercy of strangers? Wire her uncle begging for money, proving he'd been right about her foolishness all along? No, absolutely not. "Is there a road to the ranch?" Eleanor asked. The station master frowned. "Road's the long way around, follows the valley. 20 miles, maybe more. Canyon path's shorter, but it ain't easy walking. Rocky, narrow in places." He studied her worn boots, her travel-stained dress. "You planning to walk it?" "If I have to." "Sun sets in about 3 hours. You won't make it before dark." "Then I'd better start now." The man opened his mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. He shrugged. "Canyon path starts just past the saloon. Follow it west till you hit the split. Take the North Fork. Can't miss it." Eleanor nodded once, crisp and businesslike, as if she made such decisions every day, as if her heart wasn't hammering against her ribs. "Thank you." She picked up her carpet bag and walked toward the town, spine straight, chin up. Behind her, she heard the station master mutter something that sounded like "damn fool girl," but she didn't turn around. The main street of Hammond's Bend was exactly as depressing as it had looked from the train. The general store's windows displayed dusty cans and faded fabric. The saloon leaked the smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke into the street. A few people watched Eleanor pass, a woman sweeping her porch, 2 men outside the blacksmith shop, but no one spoke to her, just as well. She had nothing to say. Past the last building, the land opened up into scrub brush and red rock. The canyon path was exactly where the station master said it would be, a narrow trail cutting between 2 walls of striated stone that rose like ancient sentinels. Eleanor paused at the entrance, shifting the carpetbag to her other hand. The sensible thing would be to turn back, find somewhere to sleep, even if it meant spending her last dollars. Wait until morning, try to send word to the ranch. But sensible had never gotten Eleanor anywhere. Sensible had kept her trapped in her uncle's house, invisible and grateful. Sensible had nearly convinced her not to answer Daniel Rowan's advertisement in the first place. She'd come too far to be sensible now. Eleanor entered the canyon. The walls rose on either side, blocking the wind and trapping the heat. Her boots crunched on loose gravel. The bag grew heavier with each step, dragging at her shoulder, but she didn't set it down. If she stopped, she might not start again. The path twisted and turned, following the natural curve of the rock. Sometimes it widened into spaces large enough for a wagon. Other times it narrowed until Eleanor had to turn sideways, her skirt catching on jutting stone. Sweat trickled down her back. Her water was long gone. She'd finished it on the train. Her throat felt lined with dust. Still, she walked. The light began to change, taking on that golden quality that meant evening was coming. Eleanor's shadow stretched long and thin ahead of her. She tried not to think about what it would be like to be caught here after dark. Tried not to imagine stumbling over unseen rocks, breaking an ankle, lying here alone until... Stop it! She forced the thoughts away and focused on moving forward. Left foot, right foot. One step at a time. That's when she heard it. A sound so faint she almost missed it beneath the scuff of her own boots. A low groan, barely human, coming from somewhere ahead. Eleanor froze. Hello? Her voice echoed off the canyon walls, strange and small. Silence. Then again, that sound. Weaker this time. Definitely human. Someone was hurt. Every instinct Eleanor possessed screamed at her to turn around. She was alone, vulnerable, with no weapon and no help for miles. Whoever made that sound could be dangerous. Could be a trap. Could be... The groan came again, dissolving into a wet cough that made Eleanor's nursing instincts flare despite her fear. She moved forward, carpetbag clutched tight, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Around the next bend, the path widened into a small clearing where the canyon walls pulled back, and there, half buried beneath a slide of rocks and red earth, was a man. Eleanor's breath caught. He was sprawled on his side, one arm pinned beneath a boulder the size of a plow horse. His clothes were torn and filthy, dark with what had to be blood. His face was turned toward the ground, hatless, dark hair matted with dirt. Oh, God! The words escaped before Eleanor could stop them. She dropped her bag and ran to him, boots skidding on loose stone. Up close, she could see the damage. The boulder had him trapped from shoulder to hip. His breathing was shallow, rapid. One leg was twisted at an angle that made her stomach lurch. Can you hear me? Eleanor knelt beside him, touching his shoulder gently. His shirt was soaked through with sweat and blood. I'm going to help you. The man's head moved slightly, his eyes opened, just slits, dark and unfocused. Leave. His voice was barely a whisper, rough with pain. Not safe. I'm not leaving you here. Eleanor stood, circling the boulder, trying to assess the situation. It had to weigh several hundred pounds. There was no way she could move it alone. But maybe she didn't have to move all of it. Eleanor scanned the clearing. There, a length of dead juniper, thick as her arm, wedged between two rocks. She grabbed it, testing the weight. Solid. Heavy enough. She positioned the wood against the boulder at an angle, creating a lever. Then she found the flattest rock she could carry and placed it near the trapped man's body as a fulcrum point. This is going to hurt, she told him. When I lift, you need to pull yourself free. Can you do that? His eyes opened wider, focusing on her with visible effort. For a moment, something like recognition flickered across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by pain. Can't move. You have to try. Eleanor gripped the lever, bracing her feet. On 3. 1, 2, 3. She threw all her weight onto the wood. The boulder shifted, barely, just an inch, but it shifted. The man screamed, a raw sound that cut through the canyon like a blade. Pull! Eleanor shouted, muscles trembling with effort. Now! He moved. Somehow, God knew how, he dragged himself forward. Eleanor felt the boulder settle back, missing his body by inches. She dropped the lever and fell to her knees beside him, hands shaking. He was free. Bleeding, possibly dying, but free. Up close, Eleanor could see his face clearly for the first time. Strong features, maybe 30 years old. a scar cutting through one eyebrow. His eyes were gray, pale gray, like winter sky, and currently glazed with shock. "You're alive," she said, more to herself than him. "You're going to stay that way." She had no idea if that was true. Eleanor tore a strip from her petticoat, modesty be damned, and pressed it against the worst of the bleeding on his shoulder. The man hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. "What's your name?" Eleanor asked, needing to keep him conscious. "Caleb." The word was slurred. "Caleb Rowan." Eleanor's hands stilled. Rowan? But the man, Caleb, was already slipping away, his eyes rolling back. His body went slack against the ground. Eleanor checked his pulse. Still there. Thready and fast, but there. She sat back on her heels, looking around the empty canyon. The sun was sinking fast now, painting the rock walls in shades of amber and blood. Soon it would be full dark, cold, dangerous. She couldn't stay here, but she couldn't leave him either. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself one moment of pure, overwhelming panic. Then she opened them, stood up, and got to work. First, stop the bleeding. She used her entire petticoat, tearing it into strips, binding the worst of his wounds as tightly as she dared. The shoulder was bad, possibly broken. His leg was definitely broken. She could see the swelling even through his pants. Second, find shelter. Eleanor scanned the canyon walls and spotted it, about 50 yards back the way she'd come, a dark shadow in the rock that might be a cave. Or might be nothing. Only one way to find out. Eleanor grabbed her carpet bag with one hand and Caleb's uninjured arm with the other. Then she started to drag. He was heavy, dead weight. Her back screamed in protest, but Eleanor gritted her teeth and pulled, inch by inch, foot by foot, leaving a trail in the dust. By the time she reached the shadow in the rock, her arms felt like jelly. But it was a cave, shallow but deep enough to offer shelter from the wind. And inside, miracle of miracles, she found the remains of an old campfire. Someone had stayed here before. Eleanor dragged Caleb inside and collapsed against the cave wall, chest heaving. She gave herself 60 seconds to rest. Then she stood up and went looking for firewood. The canyon provided dried juniper branches, tufts of dead sage, even a few pieces of what looked like lumber from an old wagon. Eleanor gathered it all with numb efficiency, her mind curiously blank. If she let herself think, really think about what she was doing, about how insane this was, she'd fall apart. So she didn't think. She just moved. The fire took 3 tries to light, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the matches. But finally, blessedly, a flame caught. It spread across the kindling, filling the cave with flickering orange light. Eleanor turned to Caleb. In the firelight, she could see him properly now. Younger than she'd thought at first, probably close to her own age of 24. His face was lean, sun-weathered, with the kind of hard edges that came from years of outdoor work. His clothes, beneath the blood and dirt, were good quality. Whoever he wasn't poor. "Caleb Rowan," Eleanor murmured, studying his face. "What were you doing out here alone?" No answer, of course. He was deeply unconscious now, his breathing harsh and uneven. Eleanor checked his wounds again. The bleeding had slowed, but he needed water, medicine, proper bandages. Things she didn't have. She did have one thing, though, knowledge. Her mother had been a healer, not a doctor, but a woman who knew herbs and remedies, who could set bones and draw out fevers. She'd taught Eleanor everything before she died. At the time, Eleanor had thought it useless knowledge, fit only for country folk. Now, it might save a life. Eleanor went through her carpet bag, taking inventory. One change of clothes, her mother's medical journal, pages filled with recipes for poultices and tinctures, a sewing kit, a hairbrush, 3 books. And tucked in the bottom, a small packet of dried herbs she'd brought almost without thinking. Yarrow for bleeding, willow bark for pain, comfrey for broken bones. "Thank you, Mama," Eleanor whispered. She found a tin cup in the remains of the old campfire, dented but intact, and used it to boil water from the canyon seep she'd spotted on her way in. While it heated, she ground the willow bark between 2 rocks, creating a coarse powder. When the water boiled, she added the powder and a pinch of yarrow, creating a bitter-smelling tea. The hard part was getting Caleb to drink it. Eleanor lifted his head, cradling it in her lap, and held the cup to his cracked lips. Most of it ran down his chin, but some went in. She hoped it was enough. Next came the truly difficult task: setting his leg. Eleanor had done this exactly once before, on a neighbor's son who'd fallen from a tree. It had taken 3 grown men to hold him down while she worked. Now she had no one, just herself, and a man who couldn't scream even if he wanted to. "Forgive me," Eleanor said softly. Then she gripped his ankle and pulled. The bone shifted with a sickening crunch. Caleb's body went rigid, a strangled sound escaping his throat. Eleanor worked fast, feeling for the break, manipulating until the pieces aligned as best she could manage. She used branches and strips of her remaining clothes to create a splint, binding it tight. By the time she finished, she was crying, tears running silently down her cheeks, though she barely noticed. It was full dark outside now. The cave was a pocket of warmth and light in an ocean of cold black. Eleanor fed the fire, then settled against the wall near Caleb, close enough to monitor his breathing. She should sleep, should rest while she could, but every time Eleanor closed her eyes, she saw that boulder, felt the weight of it on her improvised lever, heard the wet crunch of bone, saw the way Caleb had looked at her in that split second before he passed out, like he knew her, like he recognized her face. Caleb Rowan, the same last name as Daniel. A brother, maybe? A cousin? Or was it just coincidence? Rowan wasn't that uncommon a name. Eleanor pulled out the letters from her bag, unfolding them carefully. Daniel Rowan's handwriting was neat, precise. "I won't lie to you," he'd written. She looked at Caleb's unconscious face, at the blood still seeping through the bandages she'd made from her own clothes. "Who are you?" Eleanor asked the silent cave. "And where is the man who was supposed to meet me?" The fire crackled. Caleb's breath rattled in his chest. And Eleanor Finch, who'd traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, sat alone in a canyon cave, wondering if she'd just saved the life of a man who would destroy hers. Outside, the wind picked up, howling through the canyon like a warning she couldn't yet understand. The first light of dawn crept into the cave like an unwelcome visitor, gray and thin. Eleanor woke with a gasp, her neck stiff from sleeping upright against the stone wall. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then the pain in her shoulders reminded her. The smell of smoke and blood brought it all rushing back. She was in a cave, with a dying man, miles from anywhere. Eleanor pushed herself upright, every muscle protesting. The fire had burned down to embers during the night. She fed it carefully, coaxing the flames back to life, then turned to check on Caleb. He was still breathing, shallow but steady. His face was flushed with fever, sweat beading on his forehead despite the morning chill. When Eleanor pressed her palm to his skin, the heat radiating from him made her stomach clench. "No, no, no!" She reached for the tin cup, her hands shaking. The water from last night was gone. She'd used it all for the willow bark tea. "Hold on, just hold on." Eleanor grabbed this cup and hurried to the canyon seep she'd found yesterday. The water trickled from between 2 rocks, painfully slow. It took 10 minutes to fill the cup halfway. 10 minutes of crouching in the cold while her mind raced through everything her mother had taught her about fevers. Infection. That was the real danger now. The wounds needed to be cleaned properly, packed with herbs, kept dry. She needed more yarrow, more comfrey. She needed honey for the bandages, or at least clean cloth. She needed things she didn't have. When Eleanor returned to the cave, Caleb was mumbling in his sleep, head turning restlessly. She caught fragments of words. North fence, cattle, can't let them. Ranch talk, delirious ranch talk. Eleanor knelt beside him and lifted his head, dribbling water between his cracked lips. Some of it went down. The rest ran across his jaw, disappearing into the collar of his torn shirt. "That's it," she murmured. "Good. Just a little more." His eyes opened suddenly, startling her. They were unfocused, glassy with fever, but aware. "Angel?" The word came out rough, confused. "No, just Eleanor, you're safe." Eleanor. He said her name like he was testing it, trying to remember something. "You came." The word sent a strange chill down her spine. "I'm here." You need to rest now. The canyon, dangerous, shouldn't have. He tried to sit up and immediately collapsed back with a groan that came from somewhere deep in his chest. God, what happened? Rockslide, I think. You were trapped. Do you remember? Caleb's eyes squeezed shut. Checking the fence. Storm 2 days ago weakened the canyon wall. I should have known better. Should have taken the long way. He opened his eyes again, focusing on her with visible effort. How did you get me out? Leverage, a long stick, and stubbornness. The corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Saved my life. Don't thank me yet. You've got a fever and a broken leg. We're in a cave with no supplies. I'm not sure saved is the right word. Better than being crushed. His gaze sharpened slightly, traveling over her face, her ruined dress, her hair falling loose from yesterday's pins. You're not from around here. No, I'm from Pennsylvania. I arrived yesterday. Yesterday? Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. Long way to travel. Yes. What brought you west? Eleanor hesitated. The truth felt too raw, too humiliating to share with a stranger. But lying seemed worse somehow, sitting here in this cave with a man who might die before nightfall. I came to meet someone, she said carefully. He didn't show. Caleb was quiet for a moment, watching her with those pale gray eyes. His loss. The simple words, spoken without pity or judgment, made Eleanor's throat tight. She looked away, busying herself with checking his bandages. You mentioned your name was Rowan, she said, needing to change the subject. Are you related to Daniel Rowan, the rancher? The pause was almost imperceptible. Yeah, he's my brother. Relief flooded through Eleanor. Then your ranch must be nearby. If I can make it there, I can bring help. No. The word was sharp, almost harsh. Eleanor looked up, surprised. Caleb's jaw was set, his expression suddenly guarded. The ranch is 10 miles from here. You wouldn't make it, not alone, not without water or supplies. I made it this far. Barely, and now you're trapped here because of me. He shifted, trying again to sit up, and this time managed to prop himself against the cave wall. His face went white with pain, but he stayed upright. Listen to me. This canyon isn't safe. When the sun gets high, the walls heat up, creates updrafts, unstable air, rocks fall. That's what got me. Then what do you suggest? We can't stay here indefinitely. We stay put until someone comes looking. And if no one comes? Caleb's expression darkened. They'll come. My foreman knows my route. When I don't show up by tonight, he'll send riders. Eleanor wanted to believe him, but she'd also believed Daniel Rowan would meet her at the station, and look how that had turned out. How long can you last with that fever? She asked quietly. As long as I have to. The stubborn set of his jaw reminded her of her father, a good man who'd worked himself to death rather than admit he needed help. Eleanor had watched him fade slowly, too proud to see a doctor until it was far too late. She wouldn't watch another man die from stubbornness. I'm going to look for herbs, Eleanor announced, standing. Yarrow grows in dry climates. There might be some nearby. You don't know this land. I know plants. My mother taught me. Eleanor picked up the tin cup. I'll stay close to the cave. If I'm not back in an hour, you can lecture me about safety. She left before he could argue, stepping out into the morning light. The canyon was different by day. The walls that had seemed menacing in darkness now glowed rose gold, striated with bands of russet and cream. The air smelled of sage and dust and something wild she couldn't name. In the distance, she heard the cry of a hawk, sharp and lonely. Eleanor kept one hand on the canyon wall as she walked, eyes scanning the ground. There, a splash of green between the rocks. She knelt, examining the leaves. Wild onion, useful for infection if she couldn't find yarrow. She dug it up carefully, roots and all, and kept searching. 20 minutes later, she'd found a small stand of yarrow growing in a protected hollow, plus some prickly pear cactus. She harvested what she needed, tucking everything into her skirt, which she'd fashioned into a makeshift basket. When Eleanor returned to the cave, Caleb's eyes were closed, but he opened them at the sound of her footsteps. You came back. Did you think I wouldn't? Wouldn't blame you if you left. This isn't your problem. Eleanor set down her collection and began sorting through it. You're a human being in pain. That makes it my problem. Most people wouldn't see it that way. Then most people are cowards. She felt his gaze on her as she worked, crushing the yarrow leaves between two stones. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted with things unsaid. Your brother, Eleanor said finally, keeping her eyes on her work. Daniel. What's he like? Another pause. Why do you want to know? Curiosity. Caleb seemed to choose his words carefully. Complicated. Good at what he does. Runs the biggest operation in the territory. Started with nothing and built it up through hard work and smart decisions. Is he kind? The question hung in the air. Eleanor looked up to find Caleb watching her with an odd expression. Kind, he repeated as if testing the word. I suppose that depends on your definition. He's fair, pays his workers well, keeps his promises. A muscle tightened in his jaw. Usually, Eleanor went back to grinding the yarrow. I see. Do you? There was something in his tone, a challenge, or maybe a warning. Eleanor ignored it, mixing the crushed herbs with a little water to form a paste. This is going to sting, she said, moving to his side. But it'll help fight the infection. Caleb nodded once, bracing himself. Eleanor peeled back the makeshift bandages on his shoulder. The wound looked worse in daylight, a deep gash, edges already showing signs of infection. She applied the paste as gently as she could, but Caleb's breath hissed between his teeth. Talk to me, Eleanor said, trying to distract him. Tell me about the ranch. What do you want to know? Anything, everything. What's it like? Caleb was quiet for a moment, jaw clenched against the pain. Then, big, 3,000 acres of grazing land mostly, cattle, some horses. The main house sits on a rise overlooking the valley. You can see for miles from the porch, all the way to the mountains on clear days. Despite herself, Eleanor felt a pull of longing. She'd grown up in a cramped city house where the only view was the neighbor's washing line. It sounds beautiful. It is. Hard, but beautiful. The land doesn't give you anything you don't earn. He watched her work, his expression softening slightly. You'd like it, I think, if you got the chance. Maybe I will. If your brother ever decides to honor his commitment. The words came out sharper than Eleanor intended. She felt Caleb go still beneath her hands. His commitment, he said slowly. What commitment would that be? Eleanor realized her mistake too late. She'd said too much, revealed too much, but there was no taking it back now. Nothing, it doesn't matter. Eleanor. His voice was quiet but firm. What commitment? She sat back on her heels, meeting his eyes. Your brother and I have been corresponding for 3 months. He asked me to come west, to consider a marriage arrangement. The words felt foolish, spoken aloud, childish and naive. He was supposed to meet me at the station yesterday. Obviously, he had second thoughts. Something complicated crossed Caleb's face. Surprise, guilt, and something else Eleanor couldn't identify. He asked you to marry him, Caleb said. It wasn't a question. He asked me to come meet him, to see if we'd suit. Eleanor looked down at her hands, stained with blood and plant matter. I sold everything I owned for the train ticket, left the only home I'd ever known, and he couldn't even be bothered to show up. The bitterness in her own voice shocked her. Eleanor took a breath, forcing it down. I'm sorry, Caleb said quietly. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. You're not responsible for your brother's cowardice. Maybe not, but still. He shifted, wincing. For what it's worth, Daniel's not usually a coward. There must have been a reason. I'm sure there was. I'm sure I simply wasn't what he expected. Too plain, or too poor, or too... Eleanor cut herself off, horrified at the words spilling out. Never mind. It doesn't matter now. She finished bandaging his shoulder in silence, her movements brisk and efficient. When she was done, she moved to check his leg. Eleanor. Caleb's hand caught her wrist, gentle but firm. Look at me. She didn't want to. Didn't want him to see the humiliation burning in her cheeks, the tears she was fighting to keep at bay. But his grip was insistent, and finally she raised her eyes to his. "Whatever my brother's reasons," Caleb said, his voice low and serious, "they have nothing to do with you being too anything. You understand? You crossed a continent alone. You saved a stranger's life. You're sitting in a cave in the middle of nowhere, taking care of a man you don't know, and you haven't complained once. That's not plain. That's not poor. That's brave." The tears came then, hot and fast, despite Eleanor's best efforts. She turned her face away, mortified. "I'm sorry. I'm not usually—" "It's all right." Caleb's thumb brushed across her wrist once, then he let go. "You're allowed to be human." Eleanor wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, took a shaky breath, and went back to work. They didn't speak again while she checked his leg, still swollen, but the splint was holding, and rebandaged his other wounds. By the time she finished, the sun was high overhead, sending a shaft of light through the cave entrance. The temperature was rising fast. "You should drink more water," Eleanor said, reaching for the cup. "So should you. When's the last time you ate?" She tried to remember. Yesterday morning, before the train arrived, a piece of bread and some cheese from her traveling supplies. "I'm fine." "You're lying." Caleb nodded toward her carpet bag. "What food do you have?" "Some crackers, a bit of dried meat, not much." "Get it. We'll split it. You need your strength." "Eleanor." He fixed her with a look that brooked no argument. "You can't take care of me if you collapse from hunger. Get the food, please." The please decided it. Eleanor retrieved the meager supplies from her bag and divided them carefully. The portions were pitifully small, 3 crackers each, a few strips of jerky no bigger than her finger. They ate in silence, chewing slowly to make it last. The food helped, but it also reminded Eleanor how empty her stomach was, how long they might be trapped here. "Tell me about Pennsylvania," Caleb said suddenly. "What was it like?" Eleanor considered the question. "Crowded, noisy, full of people who all knew each other's business." She picked at a cracker. "I lived with my uncle after my mother died. He ran a dry goods store. Very respectable, very proper. I kept house for him and his wife." "You didn't like it?" It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. "No, they were kind enough, I suppose, but I was always extra. The poor relation they took in out of duty. Every meal I ate was a favor. Every dress I wore was charity." She shook her head. "When I saw your brother's advertisement, it felt like a door opening, a chance to be something other than grateful. And instead you ended up here." "Instead I ended up here," Eleanor agreed. Then, surprising herself, she smiled. "Though I have to say, this cave is more honest than my uncle's house ever was. At least here, nobody's pretending I'm welcome." Caleb laughed, a short, rough sound that turned into a cough. When he caught his breath, he was grinning. "You've got spine, Eleanor Finch. I'll give you that. Spine and stubbornness. My mother always said they were my best and worst qualities. She sounds like a smart woman." She was. Eleanor felt the familiar ache of loss, duller now, but never really gone. She could cure almost anything with the right herbs and a firm hand. People came from miles around when they were sick. She never turned anyone away, even when we had nothing ourselves. "That's where you learned to do this." Caleb gestured at his bandaged shoulder. "Yes, she started teaching me when I was 7. Said every woman should know how to heal, because you never knew when someone might need you." Eleanor's throat tightened. "I used to think it was a waste of time. I wanted to learn music, or painting, or something refined. Now I'm grateful she was stubborn." "How long has she been gone?" 3 years. Pneumonia. The winter of 23 was brutal." Eleanor stared at the fire, remembering. "She got sick helping a neighbor's child. By the time she'd let me tend to her, it was too late. She died telling me to use what she'd taught me, to not let it go to waste." "I'm sorry." The words were simple, but something in Caleb's voice made Eleanor look at him. His expression was open, genuinely sympathetic in a way that had nothing to do with pity. "Thank you," she said quietly. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Outside, the canyon walls reflected the midday heat, turning the entrance to the cave into a shimmering mirage. "What about you?" Eleanor asked eventually. "Where are your people from?" Caleb's expression shuddered slightly. Here and there, my parents came west when I was young, worked on a few different ranches before settling here. Are they still alive? No, Pa died when I was 15, thrown from a horse. Ma followed a year later. Grief, mostly. He said it matter-of-factly, but Eleanor heard the old pain beneath the words. It was just me and Daniel after that. He raised you. More or less. He was only 17 himself, but he took charge, worked every job he could find, saved every penny. By the time I was 20, he'd scraped together enough to buy our first piece of land. Caleb's voice carried a note of respect. Daniel's not perfect, but he's a survivor. Everything he built with his own hands. Eleanor absorbed this, trying to reconcile the image with the man who'd written her such careful, thoughtful letters. Letters that now felt like lies. Does he know you're out here alone? She asked. Caleb hesitated just a fraction too long. He knows I was checking fences. But he doesn't know you're hurt. Not yet. So when you said help would come, they'll come, Caleb said firmly. My foreman's a good man. When I don't return, he'll organize a search. And if they don't think to look in the canyon? They will. This is the most direct route between the North Range and the ranch. They'll check here first. Eleanor wanted to believe him, but she'd learned long ago that hope was a dangerous thing to hold too tightly. The day dragged on, hot and slow. Eleanor made 3 more trips to the seep for water. She found some wild mint growing in a shadowed crevice and used it to make a tea that helped settle Caleb's stomach. She cleaned his wounds again as the sun began its descent, noting with relief that the yarrow paste seemed to be working. The angry redness was fading, replaced by healthier pink, but the fever remained. Every time Eleanor checked, Caleb's skin burned hot beneath her palm. As twilight approached, she built up the fire again, watching the shadows lengthen across the canyon walls. You should sleep, Caleb said. He'd been quiet for the past hour, conserving his strength. So should you. Hard to sleep when everything hurts. He shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position. Talk to me instead. Tell me more about those letters. I'd rather not. Please. When Eleanor looked at him, his eyes were serious. I need the distraction, and I want to understand. Eleanor sighed. What do you want to know? What did he write to you? My brother. She pulled the letters from her bag. She'd kept them close, though she wasn't sure why. Evidence, maybe, or just habit. He wrote about the ranch, the work, what life was like out here. Eleanor unfolded the first letter dated 3 months ago. He said he was looking for a partner, someone strong and capable, someone who wasn't afraid of hard work. That sounds like Daniel. He said he wouldn't lie to me, that he wanted honesty between us, even if it wasn't pretty. Eleanor's voice caught slightly. I believed him. Read me one, Caleb said quietly, if you don't mind. Eleanor hesitated, then chose one from the middle of the stack. Her voice was soft in the fire-lit cave as she read, Dear Miss Finch, I received your letter yesterday and read it 3 times. Your honesty is refreshing. Most people, when asked what they want from life, give pretty answers they think will please. You simply said you wanted to matter, to build something real with your own hands. I understand that desire more than I can express in writing. The ranch is that for me, proof that I exist, that I've made something that will outlast me. But it's lonely work. I've spent 10 years building walls and fences, and only recently realized I've built them around myself as well. I think you understand that kind of loneliness. I think we might understand each other. When Eleanor finished, her hands were shaking slightly. She folded the letter carefully and put it away. Caleb was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. That's quite a letter, he said finally. Yes. Eleanor's voice was barely above a whisper. It felt like he could see straight through me, like he knew exactly what I needed to hear. Maybe he did. Or maybe he was just good at writing what he thought a desperate woman would want to read. The bitterness was back, sharp and familiar. Eleanor stood abruptly, needing to move, to do something with the restless energy building in her chest. I should check on the horses, she said, then caught herself. Sorry, force of habit. There are no horses. There will be, Caleb said. Tomorrow. Help will come tomorrow. Eleanor nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She walked to the cave entrance, staring out at the darkening canyon. Stars were beginning to appear overhead, more stars than she'd ever seen in her life, scattered across the sky like salt spilled on black velvet. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "The first time I saw a sky like that, I was 12, Caleb said from behind her. "We just moved west. I'd never seen so many stars. I thought they looked like promises, tiny points of light in all that darkness." What were they promising? That somewhere out there, things were better, brighter, worth reaching for. Eleanor turned to look at him. The firelight painted shadows across his face, making him look older, tired, human. "Do you still believe that?" she asked. "I'm trying to." Something in his voice pulled at her, a loneliness that matched her own. Eleanor walked back to the fire and sat down beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his fever-flushed skin. "We're a fine pair," she said softly. "Two strangers in a cave, both waiting for someone who might never come." Caleb's hand found hers in the darkness, his grip warm and solid. "Then we'll wait together," he said. And they did. Through the night, Eleanor tended the fire and checked his wounds and forced water between his lips when the fever made him delirious. Through the night, Caleb drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes lucid, sometimes rambling about fence lines and cattle and things Eleanor didn't understand. Once, near dawn, he gripped her wrist with surprising strength. "Don't hate him," Caleb whispered, his eyes bright with fever. "Whatever happens, promise me you won't hate him." "Who?" Eleanor asked, confused. But Caleb was already slipping away again, his grip loosening. Eleanor held his hand until the sun rose, painting the canyon walls gold and crimson and promising nothing at all. The fever broke on the third morning. Eleanor woke to find Caleb watching her, his eyes clear for the first time since the accident. The glazed, distant look was gone, replaced by something sharp and aware and unmistakably guilty. "You're awake," she said, relief flooding through her. She reached to touch his forehead, still warm, but no longer burning. "The fever's down." "Thanks to you." His voice was rough from disuse, but stronger. "How long have I been out?" 2.5 days. You were delirious most of yesterday." Eleanor reached for the water. "Drink this, slowly." He obeyed, watching her over the rim of the cup. When he finished, he leaned back against the cave wall with a wince. "No one's come," he said. It wasn't a question. "No." Eleanor kept her voice neutral. "Not yet. They should have by now. Something's wrong. Or they're searching the wrong area." She began checking his bandages, grateful for something to do with her hands. "The canyon's big. Maybe We can't wait anymore." Caleb tried to sit up properly and immediately went pale, sweat breaking out on his forehead. "God. All right. Maybe I can wait a little longer. You can't walk. Your leg's broken in 2 places, possibly 3. Then you'll have to go without me." Eleanor's hands stilled. "What?" "Head west out of the canyon. Stay in the open where you can be seen. Someone will find you. A ranch hand, travelers, someone. Tell them where I am. I'm not leaving you here alone." "Eleanor?" "No." She met his eyes, her jaw set. "I didn't keep you alive for 3 days just to let you die alone while I wander around lost. We stay together. You could die here with me. Then we die together. At least that's honest." Something flickered across Caleb's face. Pain, admiration, and that guilt again, deeper this time. He looked away. "You're the stubbornest woman I've ever met." "Good. Then you know arguing won't work." Eleanor finished with his bandages and sat back. "We have enough water from the seep. I found some wild onions yesterday. And there's prickly pear fruit if we get desperate. We can last another few days at least." "And then what?" Eleanor didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she changed the subject. "Can you eat? I have a little jerky left." They shared the last of the food in silence, chewing slowly, making it last. The reality of their situation sat between them like a third presence, impossible to ignore, impossible to address. When they finished, Caleb cleared his throat. "Tell me something," he said. "Those letters Daniel wrote, did he ever mention me?" Eleanor thought back. "Once or twice, he He said he had a brother who helped run the ranch, that you were good with horses. That's all? More or less. Why? Just curious. But his expression suggested otherwise. He was quiet for a moment, then, what else did he tell you? About himself? Not much, really. He wrote more about the land than himself, the work that needed doing, what he was building. Eleanor pulled her knees to her chest. He asked me questions, though, lots of them. What I liked to read, how I spent my days, what I hoped for. She smiled faintly. I told him things I'd never told anyone. It felt safe somehow, writing to a stranger. What kind of things? Eleanor hesitated, then decided it didn't matter anymore. What did she have to lose? I told him I was tired of being invisible, that I'd spent my whole life being quiet and grateful and small, because that's what women in my position do. We take up as little space as possible. We're grateful for scraps. Her voice hardened. I told him I wanted to matter, to build something with my own hands, to wake up in the morning and know that what I did that day would make a difference. And he understood that? He said he did. He said that's exactly how he felt when he started the ranch, like he was finally making something that proved he existed. Eleanor laughed, but there was no humor in it. I thought we understood each other. Turns out I was just talking to myself. Maybe you weren't. The quiet words made Eleanor look up. Caleb was watching her with an intensity that made something in her chest tighten. What do you mean? I mean... He stopped, seemed to reconsider. I mean, my brother's complicated, but I don't think he was lying about understanding you. Some things you can't fake. You can fake anything with enough practice. Can you? Caleb held her gaze. Could you fake what you've done these past 3 days, caring for a stranger, staying when any sensible person would have left? That's different. Is it? Eleanor didn't have an answer for that. She stood abruptly, needing space, needing air. I'm going to check the seep, she said. We're almost out of water. She left before he could respond, walking out into the morning sun. The canyon walls glowed amber and rose in the early light. Somewhere high above, a hawk circled, riding the thermals. Eleanor made her way to the seep and filled the tin cup slowly, her mind churning. Something about the conversation bothered her, though she couldn't put her finger on what. The way Caleb talked about his brother, defensive, almost protective. The way he kept asking about the letters. The way he'd looked at her when she'd first found him, like he recognized her. Eleanor shook her head. She was reading too much into things. Caleb was delirious with fever, and she was exhausted and scared and looking for patterns that didn't exist. When she returned to the cave, Caleb was asleep again, his breathing deep and even. Eleanor settled against the wall and pulled out one of her books, a worn copy of Shakespeare's sonnets her mother had given her. She opened it randomly, finding Sonnet 138. When my love swears that she is made of truth, I do believe her, though I know she lies. Eleanor closed the book with a snap. The rest of the day passed slowly. Eleanor made another trip to gather herbs, finding some sage she could burn to keep the cave smelling fresher. She cleaned Caleb's wounds again. They were healing well, no signs of infection. She rationed the water carefully, allowing herself only small sips. By evening, she was starting to accept the possibility that no one was coming, that they would have to save themselves somehow. The thought terrified her, but it also clarified things. Fear had a way of burning off pretense. Eleanor. Caleb's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He was awake again, watching her across the fire. Can I ask you something? All right. Why did you really come west? The truth this time? Eleanor bristled. I told you the truth. You told me part of it, but there's more. His eyes were steady, not accusing, just curious. What were you running from? The question hung in the air between them. Eleanor could have deflected, could have lied. But sitting here in this cave, possibly dying, the truth felt easier than pretense. Myself, she said quietly. I was running from myself. From the person I was becoming, small and bitter and afraid. My uncle's house was comfortable enough, safe. I could have stayed there forever, keeping house, being grateful, growing old in someone else's shadow. She met Caleb's eyes. But I would have disappeared. Little by little, year by year, until there was nothing left of me but duty and resentment. So yes, I ran. I took a stranger's promise and bet everything on it, because at least it was a choice I made. At least it was mine. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I understand that more than you know. Do you? Yeah. He shifted, grimacing at the pain. I spent years being Daniel's shadow. The younger brother, the helper. He built the ranch, and I just existed beside it. People in town don't even know my name half the time. They just call me Rowan's brother. He laughed bitterly. Sometimes I wondered if I disappeared, would anyone even notice? Or would they just assume Daniel was doing the work of two men, like always? Eleanor heard the pain beneath the words, the loneliness that matched her own. I'd notice, she said softly. If you disappeared, I'd notice. His eyes met hers, and something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, the kind of connection that forms between people who've seen each other at their worst and stayed anyway. Eleanor, I need to tell you something. The sound of horses cut him off. Eleanor froze. For a moment, she thought she'd imagined it. Then she heard it again, the distinct sound of hoofbeats on stone coming closer. Someone's here, she breathed. She scrambled to her feet and ran to the cave entrance. There, picking their way through the canyon, were 3 riders. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see the quality of their horses, the professional way they sat their saddles. Help! Eleanor's voice echoed off the canyon walls. We're here! Help! The lead rider's head snapped up. He shouted something to the others, and they spurred their horses forward. Within minutes, they'd reached the cave. The lead rider dismounted in a smooth motion, a weathered man in his 50s with sharp eyes and a marshal's bearing. Well, I'll be damned, he said, staring at Eleanor. You actually found him. He's hurt, Eleanor said quickly. Broken legs, some broken ribs, possibly internal injuries. He had a fever, but it broke this morning. Where is he? The man pushed past her into the cave. When he saw Caleb, his expression shifted from relief to something harder. Jesus, Daniel, what the hell happened? Eleanor's world tilted. Daniel. Not Caleb. Daniel. She turned slowly, looking at the man she'd spent 3 days nursing back to life. The man who'd told her his name was Caleb Rowan. He wouldn't meet her eyes. There was a rock slide, one of the other riders was saying, examining the scene. Looks like he got caught under it. How'd you get him out, miss? Eleanor couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The pieces were rearranging themselves in her mind, forming a picture she didn't want to see. Daniel Rowan, the wealthy rancher, the man who'd written her letters, promised to meet her, then vanished. He'd been here all along. He'd known who she was. He'd lied. Miss? The rider was looking at her with concern. You all right? Fine, Eleanor managed. Her voice sounded distant, strange. I'm fine. The older man, the foreman, she assumed, was already organizing. Tom, ride back and get the wagon. We'll need a litter to carry him. Jake, check his injuries. Jake knelt beside Daniel, professional and efficient. Eleanor watched from the cave entrance, numb. You're lucky, boss, Jake said. Real lucky. Another day or two out here and... He glanced at Eleanor. Good thing she found you. Yeah. Daniel's voice was quiet. Lucky. Finally, his eyes found Eleanor's. The guilt in them was unmistakable. So was the plea. Don't say anything. Not yet. Eleanor turned away. The next hour passed in a blur. Tom returned with a wagon and 2 more men. They constructed a litter, loaded Daniel onto it with practiced efficiency. Someone brought Eleanor a canteen of water and a blanket. Someone else asked her questions she answered automatically. Yes, she'd been traveling. Yes, she'd found him by accident. No, she wasn't hurt. Through it all, Daniel watched her, silent. They loaded him into the wagon bed, cushioning his leg carefully. The foreman, his name was Marcus, turned to Eleanor. You'll ride with us, of course. Can't leave you out here alone. Where are we going? The Rowan Ranch. It's the closest place with a proper doctor. He helped her into the wagon. You probably saved his life, miss. Mr. Rowan's going to want to thank you properly. Eleanor climbed into the wagon without responding. She sat as far from Daniel as the space allowed, staring at the canyon walls as they began to move. The ride took 2 hours. 2 hours of rattling over rough ground. of Daniel's occasional groans when the wagon hit a particularly bad rut, of the ranch hands talking among themselves about how worried they'd been, how they'd searched everywhere. Eleanor didn't speak, didn't look at him, just sat with her hands folded in her lap, her mind replaying every conversation, every moment, looking for the lies. When the ranch came into view, Eleanor's breath caught despite herself. It was beautiful, a sprawling main house built of timber and stone, sitting on a rise exactly as Daniel had described in his letters. Outbuildings scattered around it, a barn, a bunkhouse, corrals filled with horses. And beyond it all, the valley spread out like a promise, golden grass rippling in the wind, mountains purple in the distance. This was what she'd come for. This view. This life. Built on lies. The wagon pulled up to the main house. People poured out. Ranch hands, a housekeeper, an older woman who had to be the cook. They swarmed around Daniel, asking questions, expressing relief. Eleanor climbed down from the wagon, unassisted, her carpetbag in hand. "Eleanor?" Daniel's voice stopped her. He was being lifted onto a proper stretcher, but his eyes were on her. "Please, let me explain." The ranch hands paused, looking between them with sudden interest. "Explain what?" Eleanor's voice was perfectly calm, perfectly cold. "We're strangers, Mr. Rowan. You don't owe me any explanations." His face went white. "That's not Miss Finch, isn't it?" The housekeeper, a capable-looking woman in her 40s, appeared at Eleanor's elbow. "I'm Mrs. Patterson. Mr. Rowan sent word about you weeks ago. Your room's been ready and waiting." Eleanor stared at her. "My room?" "Of course. Mr. Rowan was very specific about the preparations." Mrs. Patterson smiled warmly. "We've all been so excited to meet you. When you didn't arrive with the boss, we were terribly worried." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The staff knew. They'd been expecting her, which meant Daniel had received her telegram about her arrival time, had known exactly when she'd be at that station, and he'd chosen not to be there. Eleanor's hands clenched on her carpetbag. How thoughtful. "Let me show you to your room so you can freshen up. You must be exhausted after your ordeal." "Eleanor, wait." Daniel tried to sit up on the stretcher and immediately collapsed back with a gasp of pain. "Someone get Doc Morrison," Marcus barked. "Now!" In the confusion, Mrs. Patterson guided Eleanor toward the house. Eleanor went, her legs moving automatically, her mind screaming. The house was beautiful inside, polished wood floors, handmade furniture, windows that let in floods of golden light. Mrs. Patterson kept up a steady stream of chatter as they climbed the stairs, pointing out rooms, explaining the household routine. "And this is yours," she said, opening a door at the end of the hall. Eleanor stepped inside and felt her breath catch for the second time. The room was perfect. A large bed with a hand-stitched quilt, a writing desk positioned by the window with a view of the valley, bookshelves already filled with volumes, a wardrobe, a washstand with a porcelain basin, curtains that moved in the breeze, and it looked like someone had reached into her dreams and made them real. "Mr. Rowan described what you might like," Mrs. Patterson said, pride evident in her voice. "He wanted you to feel at home." Eleanor walked to the writing desk. On it sat a vase of wildflowers and a stack of letters tied with string. Her letters. The ones she'd sent to Daniel over the past 3 months. He'd kept them all. "I'll have water brought up for a bath," Mrs. Patterson said, "and I'll send up some food. You just rest now. You're safe here." She left, closing the door gently behind her. Eleanor stood in the middle of the perfect room, in the perfect house, overlooking the perfect valley, and felt something inside her crack. He'd known. From the moment she'd found him in that canyon, bleeding and broken, he'd known exactly who she was. He'd let her nurse him, talk to him, share her deepest fears and hopes. He'd held her hand in the darkness. And he'd lied. Not just lied, tested her, watched her, waited to see what kind of person she was when she thought no one important was looking. The rage that flooded through Eleanor was cold and clarifying. She walked to the wardrobe and opened it. Inside were dresses, new dresses, in her size, in colors she loved, more gifts from a man who thought he could buy absolution. Eleanor closed the wardrobe carefully. Then she picked up her carpetbag and walked out of the room. She found Daniel in what had to be the master bedroom, 2 doors down. Doc Morrison, a gray-haired man with gentle hands, was examining his leg while Marcus hovered nearby. "Miss Finch," Doc Morrison said, looking up, "I wanted to thank you. Marcus tells me you set this leg yourself. Fine work, especially under the circumstances." "Thank you." Eleanor's voice was flat. "May I speak with Mr. Rowan alone?" Marcus and the doctor exchanged glances. "Now's not really the best time," Doc Morrison began. "He needs rest." "It's all right," Daniel said quietly. "Give us a moment." They left reluctantly. When the door closed, Eleanor walked to the bedside and looked down at the man she'd saved. He met her gaze steadily, though his face was drawn with pain. "Say it," Eleanor said. "Whatever you're going to say, just say it." "I'm sorry." "For which part? Not meeting me at the station? Lying about your name? Letting me humiliate myself for 3 days while you played poor ranch hand?" "All of it." Daniel's hands clenched in the blanket. "Eleanor, I... Don't." Her voice cracked like a whip. "Don't you dare call me that. You don't have the right." "Then what should I call you? Miss Finch? Ma'am?" His jaw tightened. "You spent 3 days keeping me alive. I think we're past formalities." "We're past everything." Eleanor set down her carpet bag with deliberate care. "I came here because I believed your letters. I believed you wanted honesty, partnership, something real." She laughed, sharp and bitter. "Turns out the only thing real was my stupidity." "That's not fair." "Fair?" Eleanor's voice rose. "You want to talk about fair? You left me standing at that station, alone, in a strange town, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. Do you have any idea what that felt like?" "I know. You know nothing." She was shaking now, months of suppressed anger and fear and loneliness pouring out. "I sold everything I owned to come here. I left the only home I'd ever known. I bet my entire life on your word, and you couldn't even be bothered to show up." "I was there." The words burst out of him. "At the station. I was there." Eleanor froze. "What?" "I was there," Daniel repeated, his voice rough. "I watched you get off that train, watched you wait on that bench, watched you walk into the canyon alone." The betrayal of it stole Eleanor's breath. "You watched me leave, and you did nothing." "I was afraid." The admission seemed torn from him. 5 years ago, I married a woman who said all the right things, who seemed perfect. She was beautiful and charming, and she told me she loved the ranch, loved the life." His voice hardened. 3 months after the wedding, she disappeared. Took every penny from the ranch account and ran off with a con man she'd been working with all along. Eleanor's anger wavered, just slightly. "So you thought I thought I couldn't trust my own judgment anymore. I thought maybe if I met you as someone else, without the money and the ranch, I could see who you really were. If you were kind. If you were real." He met her eyes. "I know it was wrong. I know I should have trusted you, but I couldn't. Not after—" He stopped. "I'm sorry." The apology sat between them, inadequate and true. Eleanor wanted to yell at him, wanted to tell him his fear didn't excuse his cruelty, that being hurt before didn't give him the right to hurt her. But looking at him now, bruised and broken and thoroughly miserable, she found the words wouldn't come. "I need time," she said finally. "Time to think. Time to decide if I can forgive this." "How much time?" "I don't know." Eleanor picked up her carpet bag. "But I'm staying in that perfect room you prepared. I'm eating the food Mrs. Patterson brings. I'm taking every ounce of comfort this house offers." Her smile was sharp. "After all, you owe me that much." "Eleanor, and Daniel?" She paused at the door, looking back. "Don't ever lie to me again. About anything. Because the next time I walk away, and I don't come back." She left before he could respond, closing the door firmly behind her. In her perfect room, Eleanor sat on the edge of the perfect bed and allowed herself exactly 5 minutes to cry. Then she dried her eyes, straightened her spine, and began to unpack. She'd come too far to run now. The question was whether Daniel Rowan was worth staying for, or if she'd just traded one kind of cage for another. Outside, the sun set over the valley. painting everything gold and crimson and promising nothing at all. Eleanor woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the smell of coffee drifting up from somewhere below. For a disorienting moment, she thought she was back in her uncle's house, waking to another day of invisible servitude. Then she remembered where she was and why, and the brief piece of half-sleep shattered completely. She sat up, taking in the room by daylight. It was even lovelier than she'd realized last night. The quilt on her bed was hand-stitched with a pattern of prairie flowers. The curtains were real linen, not cheap cotton. Someone had left a pitcher of fresh water on the washstand, and beside it, a note in Mrs. Patterson's tidy handwriting. Breakfast when you're ready. No rush. No rush. As if Eleanor had all the time in the world to decide what to do with the mess her life had become. She washed and dressed in one of her own dresses, the gray traveling dress, wrinkled but familiar. The new dresses in this wardrobe mocked her with their perfect fit and careful selection. Daniel had described her preferences so accurately in his letters that someone had been able to choose clothes she would have picked herself. The intimacy of it made her skin crawl. He'd studied her words like a prospector panning for gold, learning her well enough to anticipate her tastes while keeping himself hidden behind careful lies. When Eleanor made her way downstairs, she found Mrs. Patterson in the kitchen, a vast room with a cast-iron stove and windows overlooking the eastern pastures. "There you are, dear," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "I hope you slept well. Sit, sit. I've got eggs and bacon, fresh bread, and the coffee's still hot." Eleanor sat at the large wooden table, feeling oddly out of place. The kitchen was spotless but lived in, comfortable in a way her uncle's house had never been. "Where is everyone?" Eleanor asked. "The hands eat at dawn and they're out working by now." "Mr. Rowan—" Mrs. Patterson's expression grew concerned. "He's still abed, of course. Doctor's orders. That leg needs time to heal properly." She set a plate in front of Eleanor, loaded with more food than Eleanor had seen in weeks. "He's been asking for you." "Has he?" Mrs. Patterson caught the edge in Eleanor's voice and paused, coffee pot in hand. "Forgive me for saying so, Miss Finch, but there's clearly something between you and the boss. Something complicated." Eleanor looked up, surprised by the directness. "We're all very fond of Mr. Rowan here," Mrs. Patterson continued, pouring coffee. "He's a good man. Fair. Honest, most of the time." She set down the pot and met Eleanor's eyes. "But he's been hurt badly, and hurt people do foolish things. I'm not making excuses, mind you, just offering context. You know about his first wife. The whole territory knows about her. She was a piece of work, that one. All smiles and sweetness on the surface, poison underneath." Mrs. Patterson's mouth tightened. "Near destroyed him when she left. Not the money loss, though that was bad enough. It was the betrayal. He'd opened himself up completely, trusted her with everything, and she'd been laughing at him the whole time." Eleanor pushed eggs around her plate, appetite fading. "So he decided to do the same to me. Is that what happened?" "I don't know what happened." Eleanor set down her fork. "I thought I was coming here to meet a man who wanted a partner. Instead, I found someone who wanted to test me, to see if I measured up to some standard he never mentioned." Mrs. Patterson sat down across from her, flour-dusted hands folded on the table. "Can I tell you something, Miss Finch? The day Mr. Rowan told me about you, he was different, lighter. He showed me your letters, not the contents, mind you, just the fact of them, and he said, 'I think I've found someone real, Patty. Someone who sees past the surface.'" She smiled sadly. "I hadn't seen him that hopeful in 5 years. So when he said he wanted to prepare a room for you, pick out some dresses, make sure everything was perfect, I was glad. I thought maybe he was finally healing. And then he didn't show up to meet me." "No, he didn't," Mrs. Patterson sighed. "I was furious with him. Told him so too, but he just got quiet and said he needed to be sure. I didn't understand what he meant until Marcus brought you both back yesterday." Her eyes were shrewd. "You didn't know who he was in that canyon, did you?" "Not until your riders called him by name." "And you saved him anyway. Spent 3 days caring for a stranger." Mrs. Patterson reached across and patted Eleanor's hand. "That tells me everything I need to know about you, dear. Question is, what does it tell you about him?" Eleanor opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. What did it tell her? That Daniel was a coward, a manipulator, or just a deeply wounded man who'd made a terrible choice out of fear? Before she could answer, boots sounded in the hallway. Marcus appeared in the doorway, hat in hand. "Morning, Miss Finch. Hope you slept well." "Well enough, thank you." "Boss is asking for you again, fairly insistent about it." Marcus's weathered face was carefully neutral. "But Doc Morrison's with him now, so you've got a few minutes if you need him." Eleanor stood, smoothing her skirt. "I'll go now. Best to get it over with." Mrs. Patterson's hand squeezed hers briefly. "Be honest with him, dear, and make him be honest with you. It's the only way forward." Eleanor climbed the stairs with her heart hammering against her ribs. At Daniel's door, she paused, listening to voices inside. "Lucky to still have the leg," Doc Morrison was saying. "Another few hours and infection would have set in for certain." That Miss Finch knew what she was doing. "Oh, she did." Daniel's voice was rough. "Her mother was a healer." "Well, she learned well. The splint was expertly done, and whatever poultice she used kept the wounds clean. I couldn't have done better myself with a full surgery." "When can I walk?" "Walk? Son, you'll be lucky if you're standing in a month. That bone needs time to knit properly. You push it too soon, it'll heal crooked and you'll limp for the rest of your life." A pause. "Speaking of Miss Finch, don't. I'm just saying, a woman who saves a man's life usually deserves better than whatever mess you've created." "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I? I've known you since you were 15 years old, Daniel Rowan. I know when you're being a stubborn fool." The sound of a medical bag snapping shut. "Fix it. Whatever you broke between you two, fix it. Some things are worth swallowing your pride for." The door opened and Doc Morrison emerged, nearly colliding with Eleanor. He tipped his hat. "Miss Finch, good timing. Try to talk some sense into him, would you? Lord knows he won't listen to me." He left before Eleanor could respond. She stood in the doorway looking at Daniel properly for the first time since learning the truth. He was propped up in bed, freshly shaved, wearing a clean nightshirt. His broken leg was elevated on pillows, splinted with professional materials now, instead of Eleanor's improvised branches. He looked exhausted and in pain and thoroughly miserable. "Good," Eleanor thought, then immediately felt guilty for the viciousness of it. "Come in," Daniel said quietly. "Please." Eleanor entered but didn't sit. She stood at the foot of the bed, hands folded, waiting. Daniel studied her for a long moment. "You're wearing your own dress." "Yes." "The ones in the wardrobe, you don't like them?" "I didn't say that." "But you won't wear them." Eleanor's jaw tightened. "They're beautiful, perfectly chosen, which is exactly the problem, isn't it? You knew me well enough to pick my favorite colors, my preferred fabrics, the exact style I'd choose. All from letters I wrote to a man I thought was honest." Daniel flinched but didn't look away. "I was honest. In the letters. Everything I wrote about the ranch, about the work, about wanting a partner. All of it was true. Except the part where you promised to meet me. I did meet you, just not the way you expected. That's not the same thing, and you know it." Eleanor moved closer, anger overriding caution. "You let me believe I'd been abandoned. Do you have any idea how that felt? Standing at that station, watching everyone leave, knowing I had nowhere to go and no money to get there?" "I know, You don't know anything. You were watching from safety, judging me while I was terrified and alone." Her voice shook. "And then in the canyon, when I found you, you could have told me the truth then. You could have said, 'I'm Daniel Rowan, the man who was supposed to meet you.' But you didn't. You lied. You tested me." "Yes." The admission was flat, without excuse. "I did all of that, and I was wrong." The simple acknowledgement caught Eleanor off guard. She'd expected defensiveness, justification, explanations, not this quiet acceptance. "Why?" The question came out softer than she intended. "Why not just trust me?" Daniel was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice was careful, each word chosen deliberately. 5 years ago, I thought I knew what love looked like. I thought I'd found it. Her name was Catherine, and she was everything I thought I wanted, beautiful, refined, educated. She came west to visit her cousin, and we met at a dance. She said she loved the wildness of the land, the freedom of it. Said she could see herself building a life here. His hands clenched in the blanket. We married 3 months later. I gave her everything: access to the accounts, authority over the household, my complete trust. I thought we were building something together. Eleanor waited, hardly breathing. 6 months into the marriage, she disappeared, took $20,000 from the ranch account and vanished. I found out later she'd been planning it from the start. She and her cousin, who was actually her accomplice. They'd done it before to other men. I was just the latest fool. Daniel's laugh was bitter. The money nearly destroyed the ranch. Took me 3 years to build it back up. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was knowing I'd been so completely wrong about someone, that I'd looked at her every day and seen exactly what she wanted me to see. So you decided to do the same to me, Eleanor said quietly. Make me prove myself without knowing I was being tested. I thought if you didn't know who I was, if you thought I was nobody, just some injured cowboy, I could see your real character. See if you were kind when there was nothing to gain from it, if you were strong when things got hard, if you were honest when you thought no one important was listening. And what did you learn? Daniel met her eyes. That you're braver than anyone I've ever met. That you don't hesitate when someone needs help, even when it costs you. That you're honest, even when the truth hurts. His voice roughened. That I don't deserve you, but I'm selfish enough to want you anyway. The words hung in the air between them. Eleanor felt something crack in her chest, not quite forgiveness, but the beginning of understanding. I'm not Catherine, she said. I know. Do you? Because it doesn't feel like it. It feels like you looked at me and saw her ghost, saw every woman who ever lied to get what she wanted. Eleanor's voice hardened. I'm not responsible for what she did to you, Daniel, and I won't pay for her sins. You're right. He pushed himself more upright, wincing. You're absolutely right. What I did was unfair and cruel, and... He stopped, seeming to struggle for words. I thought I was protecting myself. But all I did was hurt you, and I'm sorrier for that than I know how to express. Eleanor wanted to stay angry. Anger was clean and simple and safe. But looking at Daniel now, broken and vulnerable and thoroughly ashamed, she found it harder to hold on to. You wrote to me for 3 months, she said. You asked me questions, learned about my life, shared parts of yourself. Was any of that real? All of it. Daniel's voice was fierce. Every word. When you wrote about feeling invisible, about wanting to matter, I felt like I was reading my own thoughts. I've spent 10 years building this ranch, proving I'm more than the poor kid who started with nothing. But at the end of the day, I was still alone, still invisible in all the ways that mattered. He paused. You were the first person who seemed to see me. Not the ranch, not the success, just me. And it terrified me. Why? Because if you could see me that clearly through letters, what would you see in person? Would you find me wanting? Would you realize I'm not the man you'd built up in your mind? His jaw tightened. Or worse, would you be exactly like Catherine, showing me what I wanted to see until it was too late? Eleanor moved to the window, looking out over the valley. The land rolled away in shades of gold and green, vast and beautiful and unforgiving. She could see ranch hands working in the distance, small figures against the enormous sky. I grew up in a house where I was never enough, Eleanor said quietly. Never pretty enough, never graceful enough, never grateful enough. Every day was a reminder that I was there on sufferance, that I should be thankful for scraps. And I was angry about it, but I was also scared. Because what if they were right? What if I really wasn't enough? She turned back to face Daniel. Your letters made me feel like maybe I was wrong, like maybe there was someone in the world who would value me for exactly who I was, stubborn and direct and too honest for polite company. Someone who wouldn't need me to be smaller or quieter or more grateful. Her voice cracked. And then you didn't show up. And every fear I'd ever had about myself came rushing back. I wasn't enough. I'd never been enough. I'd been a fool to think otherwise. Eleanor, 3 days, she continued, the words pouring out now. 3 days I took care of you, gave you water when I was thirsty, fed you when I was hungry, stayed when every sensible instinct told me to leave. And the whole time, you knew. You knew who I was, what I'd sacrificed to be there, how I must have felt, and you said nothing. I know. Daniel's voice was rough with emotion, and I can't take that back. Can't undo the hurt I caused. All I can do is tell you the truth now, completely, and hope it's enough. What truth? That I fell in love with you in those letters, with your honesty, your strength, your refusal to pretend. And when you found me in that canyon, when you stayed and fought for my life, I fell in love with you all over again, not with an idea or an image, with you, the real you, exactly as you are. Eleanor's breath caught. You don't get to say that. Not after everything. I know I don't have the right. I know I broke your trust and I may never earn it back. But you asked for the truth, and that's it. Daniel held her gaze, unflinching. I love you, Eleanor Finch, and I'm sorry I was too much of a coward to trust that from the beginning. The declaration should have felt triumphant, romantic. Instead, it felt complicated and messy and painfully, brutally honest. Eleanor sank into the chair beside the bed, suddenly exhausted. I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything. I'm not asking you to forgive me or love me back or even stay. He stopped, searching for words. I'm just trying to be honest. Finally. Completely. They sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, Eleanor could hear the sounds of the ranch, horses whinnying, men calling to each other, the distant lowing of cattle. Normal life continuing around their small drama. Tell me about the ranch, Eleanor said abruptly. Daniel blinked. What? The ranch. You wrote about it in your letters, but I want to hear about it now. The real version, not the careful one you wrote for a stranger. He studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. All right. What do you want to know? Everything. Start with how you got the land. Daniel settled back against his pillows, his expression easing slightly. I was 17 when my father died. Daniel Jr., taking care of my younger brother Caleb. Wait, Eleanor held up a hand. Caleb, your brother's name is actually Caleb? Yeah. Why? Because that's what you told me in the canyon. You said your name was Caleb Rowan. Daniel had the grace to look embarrassed. I panicked. Needed a name that wouldn't be a complete lie, something I'd answer to naturally. Caleb was the first thing that came to mind. Does he know you borrowed his identity to deceive a woman? Not yet, though I'm sure I'll never hear the end of it when he finds out. A ghost of a smile crossed Daniel's face. Caleb's been east for the past 6 months, learning new ranching techniques. He's due back next week. You'll like him. Will I? He's direct, honest. Everything I should have been with you from the start. Daniel's smile faded. Anyway, when Pa died, I was determined to build something, not just survive, but thrive. Prove we were more than poverty and bad luck. So I worked every job I could find, ranch hand, blacksmith's assistant, hauling freight, saved every penny for 3 years. Eleanor listened as he talked, watching his face animate with the telling. He described buying the first parcel of land, barely 100 acres of scrub and rock that no one else wanted. How he'd worked it alone at first, sleeping in a tent, living on beans and determination. How he'd slowly, painfully built it up, bought cattle, hired his first hand, expanded. It took 10 years, Daniel said. 10 years of 18-hour days, of gambling every profit on expansion, of going without so the ranch could have. But I did it. Built something that matters, something that'll outlast me. And then you married Catherine. And then I married Catherine, Daniel agreed grimly. Thought I was finally successful enough to afford a wife, to build a family, not just a business. He looked away. Turned out I was just successful enough to be worth robbing. Eleanor reached out before she could stop herself, her hand covering his. I'm sorry that happened to you. Truly. But Daniel, what she did doesn't define every woman who comes after. I know that. Oh, in my head I know that. He turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. But knowing something and trusting it are different things. I thought I knew Catherine too. I was wrong. How could I trust my own judgment again? So you didn't. You made me prove myself without even knowing I was being tested. Yes. He squeezed her hand. And it was wrong, unfair, cruel. But Eleanor, in that canyon, when you stayed, when you fought for me, it wasn't an act. You didn't know who I was. There was no reason for you to care whether I lived or died. But you did it anyway. Because you were a human being in pain. That's reason enough. For you, maybe. But not for everyone. Daniel's thumb brushed across her knuckles. Catherine would have left me there, would have walked right past without a second glance, and I needed to know, needed to be certain that you weren't like her. Eleanor pulled her hand away. And now you know. Congratulations. I passed your test. She stood, anger rising again. But what about me, Daniel? What test did you pass? What proof did you give that you're worthy of trust? None, he said quietly. I gave you none, and you have every right to walk away. Do you want me to? Walk away? Daniel's jaw worked. For a long moment he didn't speak, then, no, I want you to stay. I want a chance to prove I'm more than the worst decision I've ever made. But, he met her eyes, but I'll understand if you can't, if the damage is too deep to repair, and if you do walk away, I'll help you. Money for wherever you want to go, references, whatever you need, no strings, no obligations. The offer caught Eleanor completely off guard. You'd do that? You saved my life. The least I can do is not trap you somewhere you don't want to be. Daniel's smile was sad. Though I really, really hope you'll stay. Eleanor walked back to the window, her mind churning. She could leave, take his money, and go somewhere new, start fresh. San Francisco, maybe, or Denver. Places where no one knew her, where she could be anyone she wanted. But standing here looking out over this valley, she didn't want to be anywhere else. Didn't want to be anyone else. For the first time in her life, she was somewhere people knew her name, where she'd done something that mattered. Mrs. Patterson liked her. The ranch hands respected her. Even Doc Morrison had praised her skill. And Daniel, complicated, wounded, infuriating Daniel, had looked her in the eye and offered her freedom while hoping she'd choose to stay. I want something from you, Eleanor said, not turning around. Anything. Complete honesty about everything. No more tests, no more games, no more careful truths that leave out the important parts. She turned to face him. If we do this, if I even consider staying, it has to be as equals, partners, not a rich man testing a poor woman to see if she's worthy. Done. I'm not finished. Eleanor moved closer to the bed. I also want time. Time to explore this ranch, meet people, figure out if I even like it here. Time to know you as you actually are, not the careful version from the letters. And during that time, you don't pressure me about marriage or commitment or feelings. We start over. From honesty this time. Daniel nodded slowly. How much time? As long as I need. She crossed her arms. Can you accept that? Do I have a choice? Yes. You can refuse and I leave today, or you can agree and we see what happens. Daniel studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he held out his hand. Partners, he said. Starting now, complete honesty. Eleanor looked at his outstretched hand, this man who'd hurt her and saved her and complicated everything. She thought about the letters that had brought her here, the lies that had nearly destroyed everything, and the fragile possibility that maybe, something real could be built from the ruins. She took his hand. Partners. His grip was firm, warm, steady. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might regret this when you realize how stubborn I actually am. I already know how stubborn you are. You dragged me half a mile with a broken leg. Stubborn doesn't begin to cover it. Daniel smiled, a real smile this time, reaching his eyes. I'm counting on it, actually. You're going to need to be stubborn to put up with me. Despite everything, Eleanor felt her lips twitch. Probably true. A knock on the door interrupted them. Mrs. Patterson poked her head in. Sorry to disturb, but Doc Morrison says Mr. Rowan needs rest. And Miss Finch, you have a visitor. A visitor? I don't know anyone here. Says his name is Thomas Wright, the station master from Hammond's Bend. He's got a telegram for you. Eleanor's heart lurched. A telegram. From her uncle, probably, demanding she return immediately. Or worse, some emergency back home. She excused herself and found Thomas Wright in the front parlor, his hat in his hands. "Miss Finch, hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all. You said you have a telegram?" He handed her the folded paper. "Came through yesterday. I didn't get a chance to deliver it before everything happened. Figured I'd bring it out today." Eleanor unfolded the telegram with trembling fingers. Eleanor, "Stop, your cousin. Mary gave birth to twin girls. Stop, all are well. Stop. She asks after you stop. Write when you can stop. Uncle James." Eleanor read it twice, relief washing through her. Not an emergency, just news. Her uncle checking on her in his gruff, efficient way. The fact that he'd bothered to send it at all meant he wasn't completely furious with her for leaving. "Good news, I hope?" Thomas asked. "Family news. Everyone's well." Eleanor refolded the telegram. "Thank you for bringing it all the way out here." "No trouble. Besides, I wanted to check on you myself. That was quite an ordeal you went through." He shifted his hat. "The whole town's talking about it. How you saved Mr. Rowan's life, stayed with him for days. Folks are mighty impressed." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I just did what anyone would do." "Begging your pardon, miss, but that ain't true. Most people would have kept walking, but you stopped. That says something about you." He settled his hat back on his head. "Anyway, I should get back. Just wanted to make sure you were all right." After he left, Eleanor stood in the parlor, holding the telegram. She could write back, tell her uncle she was fine, that she'd found a place worth staying, or at least a place she was willing to give a chance. She walked back upstairs to find Daniel asleep, his face finally peaceful. Eleanor stood in the doorway watching him, this complicated man who'd hurt her and trusted her and offered her freedom when he wanted her to stay. Outside, the sun climbed higher, and the ranch continued its daily rhythm. Somewhere in the distance, Eleanor heard laughter, ranch hands joking over lunch, maybe, or Mrs. Patterson singing in the kitchen. For the first time since arriving in the territory, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine staying. Really staying. Building a life here, with or without Daniel's love. Making herself matter through her own choices, her own work, her own stubborn refusal to be anything less than exactly who she was. It wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, was hard to repair. And Daniel had shattered hers thoroughly. But standing here in this house that felt more like home than anywhere she'd ever lived, Eleanor thought maybe, just maybe, it might be worth trying. She pulled out paper and pen from the desk in her room and began to write. Not to Daniel this time, but to her uncle. A letter telling him she was safe, that she'd found something worth fighting for, and that she wouldn't be coming back. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. The future was uncertain, complicated, and terrifying, but it was hers. Finally, completely hers. And that, Eleanor decided, was enough to build on. The letter to her uncle took Eleanor 3 tries to write. She kept starting with apologies, sorry for leaving, sorry for worrying him, sorry for being a burden, before crumpling the paper and beginning again. On the 4th attempt, she wrote simply and honestly, she was safe, she was staying, and she would write again when she had more to say. She sealed it before she could second-guess herself and left it on the hall table for the next mail run. Over the following days, Eleanor fell into the rhythm of the ranch. She woke with the sun, helped Mrs. Patterson in the kitchen, and spent her mornings exploring the property. The land was bigger than she'd imagined, rolling pastures that seemed to go on forever, stands of cottonwood along the creek, rocky outcroppings where she could sit and see for miles. The ranch hands greeted her with respectful nods and curious glances. Word had spread about what she'd done in the canyon, and they treated her with a deference that made her uncomfortable. She wasn't a hero. She was just a woman who'd refused to leave someone to die. Daniel remained confined to bed, following Doc Morrison's strict orders. Eleanor visited him twice a day, morning and evening, keeping the conversations brief and carefully neutral. They talked about the ranch, the weather, the books she was reading, safe topics that skirted around everything that mattered. On the 5th day, Eleanor was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Patterson preserve peaches when Marcus appeared in the doorway. "Miss Finch, there's someone here to see the boss. Thought you might want to be present." "Who is it?" "His brother, Caleb, just rode in." Eleanor's hand stilled on the peach she was peeling. The real Caleb. the man whose identity Daniel had borrowed. She dried her hands and followed Marcus upstairs. At Daniel's door, she heard voices. One familiar, one new. 3 days? And you let her think you were me? The new voice was incredulous. Are you completely insane? Probably, Daniel admitted. Eleanor, come in. I know you're out there. Eleanor pushed open the door to find Daniel propped up in bed and a younger man standing beside it. Caleb Rowan was perhaps 22, lean and sun-browned with an open, honest face that looked nothing like his brother's more guarded features. He turned as Eleanor entered and his eyes widened. You're her, the woman from the canyon. I'm Eleanor Finch. I'm Caleb, the actual Caleb. He shot Daniel an exasperated look. I apologize for my brother using my name to perpetrate his ridiculous scheme. It's not your fault. No, but I'm related to him, which feels like it should count for something. Caleb's expression softened. Marcus told me what you did. Saving Daniel, staying with him, keeping him alive. That was brave. Foolishly brave, maybe, but brave nonetheless. I did what anyone would do. We both know that's not true. Caleb pulled up a chair and gestured for Eleanor to take the other. So, my brother tells me you two have come to some kind of arrangement? Eleanor glanced at Daniel, who was watching them both with poorly concealed anxiety. We're starting over, Eleanor said carefully, building trust from honesty this time. About time he tried honesty, Caleb muttered, then louder. And how's that going? It's complicated. That's one word for it. Caleb leaned back, studying her. Can I be direct with you, Miss Finch? Eleanor, and please do. My brother's an idiot. Caleb, Daniel started. An idiot, Caleb repeated firmly, who let his past cloud his judgment so badly he nearly destroyed his future. What Catherine did was vile, but that doesn't excuse testing you like some kind of prospective employee instead of a partner. He turned to Daniel. You know that, right? You understand how badly you messed up? Yes, Daniel said quietly. I understand. Good, because Eleanor here seems like exactly the kind of person you described in your letters. Strong, honest, willing to work for what matters, and you repaid that by lying to her face. Caleb shook his head. I love you, brother, but sometimes your self-protective instincts make you cruel. The blunt assessment hung in the air. Eleanor found herself liking Caleb immensely. I appreciate your honesty, Eleanor said. But Daniel and I are working through this ourselves. Are you? Caleb's gaze was shrewd. Because from where I'm sitting, you're being very polite and very distant, and he's letting you, which suggests to me you're both dancing around what needs to be said. And what needs to be said? Daniel's voice had an edge to it. That you're terrified she'll leave, and she's terrified to trust you, and you're both too proud or too scared to admit it. Caleb stood. But that's between you two. I just wanted to meet the woman who saved my idiot brother's life and make sure she knew the whole family wasn't made up of liars and cowards. He tipped his hat to Eleanor and left, closing the door behind him. In the silence that followed, Eleanor and Daniel looked at each other. He's not subtle, Daniel said finally. No, but he's not wrong either. Eleanor moved to the window, needing the space. I am scared to trust you. You hurt me, Daniel, deeply. I know. But I'm also scared that I want to trust you. That despite everything, part of me still believes in those letters, in the connection we had. She turned to face him. How do I know which parts of you are real and which parts are just what you think I want to see? You ask me, Daniel said simply. Anything you want to know, anything you're uncertain about, you ask, and I'll tell you the truth, even if it's ugly, even if it costs me. Eleanor considered this. All right, why didn't you tell me the truth when I first found you in the canyon? Before I knew your name, when you were barely conscious, you could have said something then. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. Because I was afraid. Even half dead, terrified, in more pain than I'd ever felt, I was still afraid of being hurt again. And I thought if I could just see who you really were, just for a little while, I could protect myself. He paused. But the longer I waited, the harder it became. And then you were sharing things with me, real things, and I told myself I couldn't tell you because it would break whatever was building between us. Which was true, but also cowardly. Yes, it was. Eleanor moved closer. What else haven't you told me? About yourself, about the ranch, about anything? The ranch is mortgaged, Daniel said. Not heavily, but enough that one bad year could put us in trouble. I rebuilt after Catherine, but I took on debt to do it. I wanted you to think I was more secure than I am. Eleanor absorbed this. What else? I'm not always easy to live with. I get focused on work and forget to eat. I'm stubborn when I think I'm right, which is most of the time. I hold grudges. He met her eyes. And I'm still learning to trust. It won't be easy or quick, and sometimes I'll probably fail at it. But I'm trying. That's honest, at least. Eleanor sat in the chair Caleb had vacated. My turn? Your turn. I'm angry with you, still. Even though I'm trying to move past it, even though I understand why you did what you did, I'm angry. And I don't know how long it'll take for that anger to fade. That's fair. I'm also lonely. I've been lonely my whole life, and when I read your letters, I thought maybe I'd finally found someone who understood that. Someone who saw me. Her voice cracked slightly. And then you made me feel invisible all over again. Like I only mattered when I didn't know who you were. Daniel's hand reached out, stopping just short of touching hers. You matter, Eleanor. You've always mattered. I was just too scared to see it clearly. Were you? Or did I only matter once I proved myself worthy? The question came out sharper than Eleanor intended, but she didn't take it back. Daniel pulled his hand back, his expression pained. Both. And I know how that sounds, but it's the truth. Before the canyon, you were an idea, a hope. Someone I wanted to believe in but didn't quite dare. After, you were real. Undeniable. Someone who chose kindness when there was no reward for it. Someone who stayed when leaving would have been easier. He paused. You want to know the moment everything changed for me? When? When you were trying to set my leg. I was delirious with pain, barely conscious, and you were crying. I could hear it in your voice even though you were trying to hide it. And I remember thinking, she's crying for me, a stranger. She cares whether I live or die. Daniel's voice roughened. No one's cried for me since my mother died. And you barely knew me, had every reason to leave. But you stayed, and you cried, and you fought to keep me alive. That's when I knew. Knew what? That you were the person I'd been writing to all along. That the woman I'd fallen in love with through letters was exactly who she claimed to be. His eyes held hers. And that I'd made a terrible mistake by not trusting that from the beginning. Eleanor felt tears prick her own eyes. You can't just say things like that and expect it to fix everything. I know, I'm not trying to fix anything with words. I'm just answering your question, being honest. They sat in silence for a moment, the afternoon light slanting through the windows, painting everything in shades of gold. I don't know if I can forgive you, Eleanor said quietly. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. I understand. But I want to try. I want to see if we can build something real from this mess. No more tests. No more lies. Just two complicated people trying to be honest with each other. Daniel's expression transformed, hope lighting his features. I want that too, more than anything. Then we start there. Eleanor stood. I'm going to spend the rest of the day helping Mrs. Patterson. Tomorrow I want you to tell me about running the ranch. The real details, the debts, the challenges, all of it. If I'm going to consider staying, I need to understand what I'd be staying for. Done. Eleanor walked to the door, then paused. And Daniel, thank you for being honest, even when it was hard. Always, he said. From now on, always. Over the next 2 weeks, they fell into a new pattern. Every morning after breakfast, Eleanor would come to Daniel's room and they would talk. He told her about the ranch operations, the cattle rotation, the water rights negotiations with neighboring properties, the seasonal workers they'd need to hire for the fall roundup. She asked questions, challenged assumptions, offered perspectives he hadn't considered. You're good at this, Daniel said one morning after Eleanor had pointed out a flaw in his feed purchasing plan. My uncle ran a store. I kept his books for 3 years. Eleanor made a note in the ledger she'd started keeping. Numbers make sense to me. Would you want to handle the ranch accounts if you stayed? Eleanor looked up. Is that an offer? It's a question. What would make you want to stay? What role would you want here? It was a fair question, and Eleanor had been thinking about it. I want to be useful, to do work that matters. The nursing, helping Doc Morrison when he visits, treating minor injuries among the hands. That feels right. But I want more than that. I want to understand how this place runs, to be part of the decisions, not just the decorating. Then you shall be. Daniel's smile was genuine. Partners, remember? That means equal say in how things are run. Even if I disagree with you? Especially then. I've been making all the decisions alone for too long. It's made me stubborn and short-sighted. He gestured at his broken leg. Case in point. Eleanor found herself smiling despite herself. You're learning. I'm trying. By the 3rd week, Daniel was finally allowed out of bed. He insisted on using crutches despite Doc Morrison's warnings about taking it slow. Eleanor watched him struggle down the stairs, stubborn and determined, and felt something in her chest soften. You're going to fall and break something else, she said. Then you'll patch me up again. Daniel grinned at her, slightly breathless from the effort. I trust your nursing skills. Idiot. But she stayed close, ready to catch him if he stumbled. He didn't, but the fact that she was there mattered. That evening, Caleb knocked on Eleanor's door. Walk with me? He asked. I want to show you something. Eleanor followed him out to the stables, where he saddled 2 horses with practiced efficiency. Can you ride? He asked. Barely. My uncle had a cart horse I rode a few times. Close enough. Caleb helped her mount a gentle mare named Daisy, then swung onto his own horse. We won't go far. They rode west toward the sunset, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple and deep rose. Caleb led them to a small rise overlooking the valley, where they dismounted and stood watching the light fade. This is where Daniel came when our mother died, Caleb said quietly. He'd ride out here every evening for weeks, just sit and watch the sun set. I didn't know. He doesn't talk about her much, about either of our parents, really. But they loved this land, died trying to make something of it. Caleb looked at Eleanor. Daniel spent 15 years trying to prove their sacrifice mattered. That's what the ranch is to him, proof that they didn't die for nothing. Eleanor understood, in that moment, something she hadn't before. The ranch wasn't just property to Daniel. It was a promise, a monument, the physical manifestation of everything he'd fought for. He's afraid to lose it, she said. He's afraid to lose everything. The ranch, yes. But also, Caleb paused. Catherine didn't just take his money. She took his ability to believe in his own judgment, made him question every instinct, every feeling. He's been living half a life ever since, keeping everyone at arm's length. Until the letters. Until you. Caleb turned to face her fully. I've never seen him write like that before. Open and honest and hopeful. And then when you actually came, when you were real and not just ink on paper, I think it terrified him. So he tested me. So he protected himself. Badly. Cruelly. Caleb's expression was serious. I'm not making excuses. What he did was wrong. But Eleanor, he's trying now, really trying, and my brother doesn't try at things he doesn't believe in. Eleanor watched the last of the sun disappear below the horizon. Why are you telling me this? Because you're thinking about leaving. I can see it in how you hold yourself, like you're ready to run at any moment. And I want you to know that if you stay, if you choose to build something with Daniel, it won't be easy, but it'll be real. He's not capable of pretending anymore. You've seen too much of him. What if seeing too much is the problem? What if I can't get past what he did? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then, my father used to say that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone whose broken pieces fit with yours, someone you can build something with, even when it's hard. He looked at Eleanor. You and Daniel are both broken in ways that fit. The question is whether you're brave enough to try putting yourselves back together. They rode back in comfortable silence, arriving just as full dark settled over the ranch. Daniel was on the porch, balanced on his crutches, clearly watching for them. You took her riding without asking me? He called to Caleb. She's not your property, brother. She can ride wherever she likes. I know that. Daniel stopped, seeming to hear himself. You're right. I'm sorry, Eleanor. Eleanor dismounted, handing the reins to Caleb. I'm going to take a walk. Alone. I need to think. Neither man argued. Eleanor walked past the outbuildings, past the corrals, until the ranch sounds faded behind her. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered overhead like diamonds on velvet. She found a large rock and sat, wrapping her arms around her knees. The truth was, Caleb was right. She was thinking about leaving. Every day, some part of her calculated escape routes, money saved, places she could go, ways she could start over somewhere else. It was a habit from her old life, always having a plan for when she became too much of a burden. But another part of her, a growing part, didn't want to leave, wanted to stay and fight for this strange, complicated possibility with Daniel. Wanted to see if they could build something real from the wreckage of his deception and her hurt. The question was which part would win. Eleanor sat there for a long time, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. When she finally stood, her decision wasn't made, but it was closer. She walked back to find Daniel still on the porch, a blanket around his shoulders, against the evening chill. You waited, Eleanor said. I wanted to make sure you came back. His voice was quiet. You always have a choice to leave, Eleanor. I need you to know that. Every day, every moment, you can choose to walk away, and I won't stop you. I know. Eleanor climbed the steps and sat beside him, their shoulders not quite touching. That's part of why I'm still here. They sat in silence, watching the night. After a while, Daniel spoke. Tell me about your mother. The question surprised Eleanor. Why? Because you've mentioned her a few times, and your voice changes when you do, softens. I want to understand what made you who you are. So Eleanor told him about her mother's herb garden, the rows of carefully tended plants that yielded remedies for everything from coughs to heartbreak, about the way she'd taught Eleanor to see the world. Every plant had a purpose, every person a story worth knowing, about how she'd died helping someone else, just as she'd lived. She sounds remarkable, Daniel said when Eleanor finished. She was. She saw the best in everyone, even when they didn't deserve it. Eleanor smiled sadly. Sometimes I wonder what she'd think of this situation. Of you. Probably that I'm a fool who doesn't deserve you. Maybe. Or maybe she'd say that everyone deserves a second chance. That's what she believed, that people could change if they wanted to badly enough. Do you believe that? Eleanor thought about it. I want to. I want to believe that you can be the man you were in those letters, the one who understood loneliness and wanted to build something real. I am that man, Daniel said quietly. I'm also the man who's been hurt and made mistakes out of fear. Both are true. The question is whether you can accept both. Eleanor turned to look at him in the starlight. His face was open, vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. No walls, no careful control. Just honest fear and honest hope. I'm scared, Eleanor admitted. Scared to trust you. Scared I'm making a mistake. Scared that if I let myself love you, you'll find some new reason to test me. I won't. I promise you, Eleanor, no more tests, no more games, just us, as we are. Complicated and flawed and trying. How can you promise that? How can you know you won't get scared again and push me away? I can't know, Daniel said. I can't guarantee I won't make mistakes, but I can promise that when I do, I'll own them. I'll be honest about them, and I'll fight like hell to do better. He reached for her hand slowly, giving her time to pull away. That's all I have to offer, my word and my effort. Is it enough? Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, his calloused from work, hers stained with ink and herbs. Two broken people, Caleb had said, whose pieces might fit. I don't know, she said honestly, but I'm willing to find out. The smile that broke across Daniel's face was like sunrise, slow and warm and transforming. That's all I ask, he said, a chance to prove myself, a chance to build something real with you. They sat together until the cold drove them inside, hands linked, watching the stars and talking about small things, favorite books, childhood memories, dreams for the future. It wasn't a declaration of love, it wasn't forgiveness, but it was a beginning, a real one, this time, built on truth. The weeks that followed were easier and harder than Eleanor expected. Easier because Daniel kept his word about honesty, sometimes brutally so. When he was frustrated with his slow healing, he admitted it instead of pretending everything was fine. When ranch decisions stressed him, he talked through his concerns instead of making choices alone. When he woke from nightmares about Catherine, about being trapped under rocks, about Eleanor leaving, he told her about them. It was harder because honesty meant seeing all of each other, the beautiful and the ugly. Eleanor learned that Daniel could be controlling when he was scared, cold when he felt vulnerable, sharp-tongued when he was in pain. Daniel learned that Eleanor could be unforgiving when her trust was tested, stubborn to the point of recklessness, and prone to withdrawing when emotions ran too high. They fought, sometimes bitterly. About ranch management, about Eleanor's desire to help Doc Morrison with difficult cases despite the social impropriety, about Daniel's tendency to make decisions and announce them rather than discuss them first. But they also talked through every fight, learned to apologize without defensiveness, to forgive without keeping score, to build something that could withstand their combined stubbornness. 6 weeks after Eleanor's arrival, Daniel was finally cleared to walk without crutches. He insisted on going out to check the fences. His first real work since the accident. Eleanor found him that evening in the barn, grooming a horse with methodical attention. "How was it?" she asked. "Hard. Humbling. My leg aches, and I can't ride the way I used to." He set down the brush. "But I was useful again. Part of the work instead of just watching." "I know that feeling." Daniel turned to face her fully. "Do you? Do you feel useful here?" "Yes, working with Doc Morrison, managing the household accounts, helping Mrs. Patterson. I feel like I matter, like what I do makes a difference." "Good." Daniel wiped his hands on a rag. "Because I have something to ask you, something important." Eleanor's heart jumped. "All right. There's a dance in town next Saturday, a harvest celebration. The whole county comes." He took a breath. "I'd like you to come with me. Not as the woman who's staying at my ranch, as the woman I'm courting, publicly." Eleanor understood the significance. Hammond's Bend was a small community where everyone knew everyone's business. Arriving together at a public dance was a declaration. "Are you sure?" she asked. "People will talk. They'll have opinions about how we met, about what I'm doing here. Let them talk." Daniel's voice was firm. "I've spent 5 years hiding from gossip, from judgment, from anything that might hurt me. I'm done hiding. I want people to know that you matter to me, that you're not temporary or uncertain or just someone passing through." "What am I then?" Daniel stepped closer, his eyes holding hers. "You're the woman I want to build a life with. If you'll have me. If you can trust me enough to try." Eleanor's breath caught. It wasn't a proposal, not exactly. It was something more honest than that, an acknowledgement of where they were and where they might go. "I'll come to the dance," she said. "But Daniel, this doesn't mean I've completely forgiven you. Doesn't mean I'm ready for promises or commitments." "I know. I'm still figuring out if I can do this. If we can do this." "I know that too." He reached for her hand. "But we're figuring it out together. That's what matters." The dance was held in the town hall, a large room decorated with autumn leaves and lanterns. Eleanor wore one of the dresses Daniel had chosen, a deep green that brought out the color in her eyes, and tried not to feel self-conscious as they entered. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Eleanor felt the weight of dozens of eyes assessing her, judging her, drawing conclusions. Daniel's hand tightened on hers. "Ignore them. They'll warm up once they know you." He was right. Within an hour, Eleanor had been introduced to half the county. The women were curious but kind, asking about her journey west and clucking sympathetically over her ordeal in the canyon. The men treated her with respect, several thanking her for saving Daniel's life. "You're a local hero," Mrs. Chen from the boarding house told Eleanor. "The woman who crossed half the continent and saved Daniel Rowan from certain death. Very romantic." Eleanor laughed despite herself. "It wasn't romantic. It was terrifying. All the best romances are." Mrs. Chen winked. Mark my words, you two will be married by spring. When the dancing started, Daniel led Eleanor onto the floor despite his limp. He moved carefully, favoring his injured leg, but he moved. You're going to hurt yourself, Eleanor said. Worth it. Daniel spun her gently. I've been imagining this since I wrote the first letter, dancing with you, seeing you smile. You imagined me in a canyon cave, exhausted and covered in blood? I imagined you exactly as you are, stubborn and brave and more beautiful than you realize. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. You can't say things like that in public. Why not? They're true. They danced 3 more songs before Daniel's leg forced him to stop. They found seats near the refreshments, watching the other couples whirl past. Eleanor, Daniel's voice was serious. There's something I need to say. She turned to face him, suddenly nervous. What? I love you. The words were simple, clear, without hesitation. I know I don't have the right to say it. I know you might not feel the same way, might never feel the same way. But you asked for honesty, and that's the truth. I love you. Not the idea of you, not the hope of you. You, exactly as you are. Eleanor's throat tightened. She'd known this was coming, had felt it building between them, but hearing it spoken aloud still stole her breath. Daniel, you don't have to say anything back. I just needed you to know, needed to be honest about it. His hand found hers. Whatever you decide, wherever this goes, I needed you to know that what I feel is real. Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, at this complicated man who'd hurt her and trusted her, and was now offering his heart with no guarantees. And she realized, with sudden clarity, what her answer was. I love you too, she said quietly. I've been fighting it, trying not to, telling myself it was too soon or too complicated or too risky. But it's true. I love you. Daniel's expression transformed. You do? Yes. You're infuriating and stubborn, and you made terrible decisions out of fear. But you're also honest when it costs you, brave when it matters, and you're trying so hard to be better. How could I not love that? Eleanor? His voice broke. But loving you doesn't mean I'm ready for marriage or promises. Not yet. I need more time to trust that this is real, that you won't wake up one day and decide I need to prove myself again. I won't. I swear to you, I believe you mean that. But I need to see it. Need to know it in my bones, not just my head. Eleanor squeezed his hand. Can you be patient with that? Can you love me and let me take the time I need? As long as you need, Daniel said immediately. Years, if that's what it takes. I'm not going anywhere. Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat like that, watching the dancers, while the harvest celebration continued around them. The season turned toward winter. Eleanor and Daniel fell into a partnership that surprised them both with its ease. She managed the household accounts and discovered a talent for negotiation that saved them money on feed purchases. He taught her to ride properly and delighted in her fearlessness with even the most spirited horses. They argued about everything, crop rotation, employee wages, whether to expand the herd, but they argued as equals, neither one deferring to the other. Sometimes Daniel won, sometimes Eleanor did. Often they found third solutions neither had considered alone. One evening in late November, Eleanor was in the study working on the books when Daniel appeared in the doorway. Come with me, he said. I want to show you something. He led her outside to the rise where Caleb had taken her months ago. The valley spread below them, golden grass turned silver by moonlight, mountains dark against the starlit sky. This land, Daniel said quietly. For 15 years, it's been everything to me. My purpose, my proof that I mattered. But standing here with you, he turned to face her. It's still beautiful, still matters, but it's not everything anymore. You are. Eleanor's heart stuttered. Daniel? I'm not proposing. Not yet. I know you need more time. He took her hands. But I needed you to know that you've changed me, made me see that building something meaningful isn't just about land or success. It's about who you build it with, who you trust enough to share it all with. The failures and fears, not just the triumphs. You've changed me too, Eleanor said. I came here thinking I needed to prove I was worthy of being chosen, But you've shown me I was always worthy, that I didn't need to earn the right to matter. You've always mattered. I just wasn't brave enough to see it clearly at first. They stood together on the rise, looking out over the valley that had become home. I'm ready, Eleanor said suddenly. Ready for what? To stop being scared, to stop holding back. She turned to face him fully. I trust you, Daniel. Really trust you. Not perfectly. I'm not sure trust is ever perfect, but enough. Enough to build something real with you. Eleanor, ask me, she said, what you were going to ask that first day in the canyon before the rescue came. Ask me now. Daniel pulled a small box from his pocket. He'd been carrying it, she realized, waiting for this moment. Eleanor Finch, he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. Will you marry me? Not because you traveled 2,000 miles or because it's expected or because you feel obligated, but because you choose to. Because you want to build something real with a stubborn, flawed man who loves you more than he knows how to express. Eleanor took the box and opened it. Inside was a simple gold band with a small sapphire, her mother's birthstone. How did you? I wrote to your uncle. Asked him about your mother, what she loved. He told me about the sapphires. Daniel's smile was soft. I wanted you to have something that connected you to her, to the woman who taught you to be strong and kind and brave. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. It's perfect. Is that a yes? Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Eleanor laughed through her tears. I choose you. I choose this. I choose us. Daniel pulled her close, and they stood there on the rise as the stars wheeled overhead, two broken people who'd found a way to be whole together. The wedding was small, held at the ranch on a clear December morning. Caleb stood as Daniel's best man, Mrs. Patterson as Eleanor's witness. Dr. Morrison officiated, reading from a worn book of poetry Eleanor's mother had loved. Eleanor wore a cream-colored dress, not one Daniel had chosen, but one she'd made herself with Mrs. Patterson's help. She wanted this choice to be entirely hers, a dress she'd created with her own hands for the life she'd chosen with her own heart. As they spoke their vows, promises of honesty, partnership, and patience with each other's flaws, Eleanor thought about the journey that had brought her here, the letters that had started everything, the canyon that had tested everything, the long, difficult weeks of learning to trust again. None of it had been easy, none of it had been simple, but standing here now, speaking promises to a man who knew her completely, her strength and her stubbornness, her kindness and her anger, her dreams and her fears, Eleanor knew it had been worth it. They were both still broken in places, still learning, still imperfect, but they were also honest, partners, equals. And that, Eleanor had learned, was more valuable than any perfect romance could ever be. After the ceremony, as the small gathering celebrated with Mrs. Patterson's cooking and Caleb's increasingly embarrassing stories about Daniel's youth, Eleanor found herself on the porch watching the sunset. Daniel joined her, slipping his arm around her waist. Regrets? He asked. None. You? Not a single one. He pulled her closer. Though I reserve the right to regret specific arguments in the future, you're remarkably stubborn when you think you're right. So are you. Then we're well matched. Daniel pressed a kiss to her temple. Thank you. For what? For staying, for giving me a second chance, for being brave enough to trust me even when I didn't deserve it. Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. Thank you for being honest, for letting me see all of you, not just the careful parts, for being willing to build something real, even when it was hard. They stood together as the sun painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson, two people who'd found each other through deception but chosen each other through truth. The land stretched before them, vast and beautiful and unforgiving, full of work and challenges and possibilities, but they would face it together, as partners, as equals, as two stubborn, complicated people who'd learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing each other, honestly and completely, every single day. The sun set over the valley, and Eleanor Rowan, no longer Finch, no longer invisible, no longer running from herself, smiled. She was home. Finally, truly home. And this time, she'd chosen it herself.